Hello, everyone, and good morning. It is early morning where I am. I woke up just a little while ago, got dressed, sat down, started up the computer, and checked my email. And the first thing I saw was a brand new edition of the newsletter from the New York Times, Race Related. And the title alone caught my attention, as so many titles do. And as I am sort of thinking about what my post-Lords of the Night YouTubing might be, I am, in my own mind, spitballing several ideas of either series or things that I might do. And the name occurred to me, as I was looking at this article, to come up with a title, sort of a series title. And I was like, what could I call this? If I was going to do a regular, either scripted or otherwise, series of videos on news articles or things, what would I call it? And I was like, Articles of Faith. Ooh, isn't that catchy? Especially if it's something about social justice or restorative justice or some of the other topics I've covered in the past. And so this is the first edition. If I do any more of these, they'll probably be scripted, but hey, this is all an experiment. So what did I get in the mail today? Well, this is called, if you can believe it from the title I put on the thing, What Should I Do with My White Privilege at Work? Now, I've only read maybe the first few sentences of this, so it'll be all a mystery to me as it is with you. But my first thought was, well, I suppose then you've already accepted the fact that you have white privilege. I suppose you've already accepted the fact that you possess some sort of superiority, willful or not, over other people based on your race. I don't know. What do you do with your white privilege at work? Well, let's find out together. Again, this comes from the newsletter, which I think anybody can sign up for. It's called Race Related. And I get one every week or so. And this takes the form of a advice column. It's not always the case. Race Related is sort of the banner headline of the whole thing, but they have different content depending on the week. But this week it was an advice column. So, Race Manners, How to Address Inequities by Janae Desmond Harris. Janae Desmond Harris is a contributing opinion writer and writes the Dear Prudence column at Slate. Oh, Slate! Oh, I feel so fancy. We've read Dear Prudence once or twice on Lords of the Night, so it's kind of familiar territory. But before I get into it, hello to those of you that have joined me on this early Saturday. That's right, it's Saturday. No Name, Chicago Mike, Lurking Gopher, Matt Barnes, Lexi Mads, the gayest person on YouTube, Swirl Blue, Non-Vitae Rex. Good morning to you all. So let's find out about white privilege at work. I am a white woman who was recently promoted to a high-level administrative position in my school district. Okay, school district. Got it. At the same time, highly experienced and qualified Black women were displaced from their leadership positions. I just want to note something real quick. And it is a semantic thing, but I'll say, white is lowercase, black is uppercase. This seems to be the new standard in referencing race. We've seen several times in media articles and such. It's interesting. I'll start back. At the same time, highly experienced and qualified Black women were displaced from their leadership positions. Okay, so you were promoted to a high-level position, and specifically Black women were displaced from their leadership positions. Why? Because they were Black? We're not going to get an answer to that question in this little bit here, but these are the questions that occur to me. While the school district is requiring all employees to address issues of race and equity, our hiring practices do not reflect these values. So by your promotion, your school district is not reflecting the values of race and equity, issues of race and equity. You won't tell us why the experienced Black women were displaced from their leadership position. That sounds like a very diplomatic way of saying they were removed, but you won't say why. But okay. I am challenged by my decision to continue to hold my leadership role and my position in the midst of these conflicting messages, actions, and values. What can I do to address these inconsistencies and this discrimination? Quit. Quit right now. If you possess white privilege, if you have been promoted to a position of authority that you did not earn at the expense of other people who are overqualified compared to you, and you know that they were taken out of their positions based on race, well, then you have benefited from a racist system and you should quit. If you truly believe in what you are saying, then you do not deserve to be there. You are there illegitimately, and you are benefiting on someone else's misery knowingly. So quit. There really is no other decision if you believe what you say. And that's something that I've always found very interesting about people who stand on stages, declare the existence of white privilege, and then yet retain their positions as politicians or educators or business people or whatever. It's very interesting. Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, several other celebrities that will complain and state proudly about the existence of white privilege, but somehow they earned their degrees. They earned their certifications legitimately. Yeah. Anyway, that'd be my advice to our speaker here. I'd say quit. If you know it is the case that the institution you are working for does not reflect the values that you want them to, that you are benefiting from racism, you should quit. But that's just my advice. What does Janae Desmond Harris have to say? I'm sure you're feeling guilty about how you may have unfairly benefited from your employer's actions. Okay. But the district, including all the kids who go to school there, is better off with you in a leadership role than it would be with someone who didn't care about discrimination. And your leaving, obviously, won't make the district hire or promote more black women, so I don't want you to quit this job. So our author is glad to have someone in a position of authority who can impose benevolent discrimination on hiring practices. Okay. That's if you plan to actually do something to improve the situation, of course. Of course. Spoiler, you have to. Because if you don't, all of the power that comes with a senior role and being white will go to waste. You have to act in order to impose benevolent discrimination in a school district. Okay. But before I get into what, quote unquote, doing something might look like, I want to remind you that you are definitely not the only person looking around after last year's big summer of, quote unquote, racial reckoning and asking whether anything has actually changed aside from a training or public statement here and there. Enrica Ruggs, the director of the University of Memphis's Center for Workplace Diversity and Inclusion, told me this is quite common. Quote, "We're seeing a lot of virtue signaling." You don't say. Which is not in and of itself a bad thing, she said. Oh, okay. Quote, "But you can't just say, we fixed this one thing one time and now we're anti-racist. You have to make sure you're intentionally trying to reduce discrimination and increase inclusion," unquote. Many institutions, she said, have not. Reduce discrimination and increase inclusion by denigrating people on the basis of their skin color and hiring other people on the basis of theirs. Right. You're right to be upset. Oh, I am very upset. Dr. Ruggs reminded me that while discrimination is obviously most harmful to its targets, it takes a toll on overall morale and productivity in a workplace and hurts bystanders who observe it too. That means you. In one article, she's compared the effects of witnessing racial bias to exposure to secondhand smoke. Witnessing racial bias. Well, here's the thing. If simply witnessing racial bias is akin to secondhand smoke, well, I just took a giant whiff of it right here. But never mind me. So don't approach this as raising a fuss or filing a complaint on behalf of the black women who were displaced. Instead, remind yourself that it's part of your job as a high-level administrator to make the school district better and stronger, which means making sure that experienced and qualified people are rewarded for their work. This is your fight too. Okay, well, you're not talking about simply experienced and qualified people. There's a caveat there. A very important caveat that you're focusing on. Because if we were just talking about experience and qualifications, well, I would have nothing to say personally. But that's not what we're talking about, is it? First order of business, you need to get the facts. You say that these black women were displaced. It's not clear whether you mean they were fired, demoted, or reassigned to less attractive senior positions. Okay, I agree with our author. That's the very first thing I asked. What do you mean? What were the circumstances? I mean, the implication is that they were removed because they were black, and you were elevated because you were white, speaking of the author of the original comment. So kudos to our advice columnist. Let's see. But in any case, you should try to find out why. It sounds like you suspect that discrimination, unintentional or otherwise, was a factor in the way management treated these women. Though you will probably never know for sure, you should get as much information as you can. I agree. But it's not so much that it sounds like she suspects it's discrimination, simply that it is. I don't think there was anything implicit about that statement. You know, it's very explicit in its implicity, if you get me. After you've done that, set up a virtual coffee with the most senior person you can reach to call attention to the tension you see between what the district is saying about racism and what it's doing. Okay, so even though you've advised her very wisely to look into the reasons behind why these other women were quote-unquote displaced, your immediate next piece of advice is assuming that she finds out that it was discrimination. Okay. Your script for starting that conversation is, quote, so I've noticed that we care about racial justice and equity, but we fired all the black women, unquote. And then in parentheses, for you listening at home, okay, not literally that, but you should confront them with the facts you've uncovered head on. Parentheses. Okay. So it's what you want to say versus what you will say with an assumption of, okay. This will most likely be followed by a silence so long and awkward that it makes you wonder if your colleague hit mute by mistake. But just let it sink in. Yes, let the accusation, especially if you don't have any actual evidence, which I'd be amazed if you did find actual documentary evidence that whoever these women are were released or displaced or whatever simply on the basis of their skin color. But yeah, just let that accusation sink in. That very inflammatory accusation that has legal consequences, PR consequences, and so on. Witchfinder General. Dr. Ruggs said, quote, sometimes these organizations are not even comparing their words to actions and seeing misalignment, unquote. Although you're likely to hear, quote, we can't discuss the details of personnel matters, unquote, you should feel free to diplomatically ask for an explanation. I'm going to go back real quick. Sometimes these organizations are not even comparing their words to actions and seeing misalignment, unquote. Right. So any outcome that some observer from the sidelines decides is racist, they perceive it. They have divined it of their own volition. Even if the organizations aren't actually doing anything racist, as long as you can categorize it as such, well, you've seen the misalignment where they didn't. And so the best thing to do is start throwing firebombs in Zoom calls. Thank you, tall person. Hoy, can't watch live. We'll watch in full later. Happy National Sea Serpent Day. It's Loch Ness Monster Day. Oh boy, I bet Tail Teacher's all excited. Nessie's getting her due. Right? Thank you, tall person. Actually, you know what, tall person? If you, by your avatar, if you were taking a swim, you might be mistaken for a sea serpent. Oh, I wonder if that's where some sea serpent stories came from. Just like giraffes taking a bath. I don't know. But Dr. Rugg suggests that you be forward-looking. Don't just speak up about things that have already gone awry. Also push to change hiring practices so that any discrimination that's built into the system is minimized. Do tell. Ask, quote, when we're going into hiring decisions, how can we use practices that we know help to reduce discrimination? What are the systems that we're going to use to reduce the chance of even getting to a point where we see these inconsistencies between our proclaimed values and our actions, unquote? I have no idea. What systems are you going to use in the process of hiring people that is going to ensure there is no discrimination when your first concern is the skin color of the person you are considering? I am dying to know. These are a few concrete changes you can propose. All right. Excellent. As you may have heard me ask many times in a TEDx, give me some active examples, some concrete examples. Here we go. When it comes to interviewing, ask all candidates the same questions in the same order. Okay, that sounds very common sense, but all right. Parenthetical, quote, that way you're not giving some people more opportunities to shine, unquote, Dr. Rugg said. That sounds like boilerplate interview process, but okay. Next, use structured metrics when you're evaluating candidates. Decide what you'll be looking for and how much various qualities will be weighed and scored before you do any interviews. Quote, too often we look at how a person makes us feel and whether they fit, and we know that thinking of fit leads to bias, unquote, Dr. Ruggs said. Of course it does. Bias is not inherently bad. This is something that I wish more people would stop and think about for a second. It all depends on the context. If I have a bias towards someone who is not a serial killer, that's not a bad bias. It's like, well, I have to choose between these two people. I have someone who's not a serial killer, and I have someone who is. I seem to be biased against serial killers. I must be a bad person. Bias is not inherently bad, and bias towards someone you want to hire versus someone you do not want to hire is also not inherently bad. It depends on the context. If somebody barges into an interview, has a bad attitude, but possesses all of the qualities otherwise and skills and experience that would be fitting of the job, am I going to hire that person or the person who walks in who has all of the experience and abilities necessary to fulfill the job, but has a good attitude, has a positive attitude? Actually, I don't know, did some research on the company before coming to the interview. Things that are a little bit more, amorphous. Would I have a bias towards someone because, I don't know, they seem to fit better? Yes, I might. And it's not inherently bad. Depends on the context. Make interviews as blind as possible, concealing names and other information that might suggest a candidate's race or gender. An interview. Make an interview blind, concealing names, race, or gender. What? Unless you're doing an interview over text, which I guess is an option, sort of. At some point, you're going to have to sit down with this person and speak to them because you're going to be working with them as blind as possible. I mean, I could see making the application process as blind as possible, for the sake of sorting them out before you start selecting them for interviews. You preclude things like names and race and gender and age, and you just look at someone's work history and so on. Yeah, okay. But once you get to the interview process, I think some of those things are going to be given away just by the matter of talking to someone. Quote, the research shows that people have negative biases. Wait, what? The research shows that people have negative biases names that sound ethnic. Do you mean negative biases towards names that sound? That's bad. They see Enrica, and that sounds black. Does it? Says who? Well, apparently you. Okay. People would evaluate that lower than Emily, Dr. Rugg said. People would. Oh, okay. What kind of people? I don't know. Continuing. Organize others who feel secure in their roles, parentheses, probably white people given the district's track record, parentheses. Our author of the question is white. She doesn't feel secure in her role. So probably white people. All right, well, tell me again about discrimination. Tell me again about racism. Okay. Organize others who feel secure in their roles to help advocate these changes and also to hold the district accountable if, after some time, you're not seeing results. How do you measure results? There's only one metric that we are concerned with here, isn't there? And given that singular metric, if you complain that you're not seeing the results you want, what exactly are you asking to have happen in the hiring process? I realize that small process tweaks seem very dry and underwhelming, especially compared with the emotion and drama of the big anti-racism statements that so many institutions have made and the pain of discrimination, to say nothing of the pain of the people who've already been affected. Yes, the pain of discrimination. And again, what is your primary focus in achieving the outcome in the processes you are suggesting? But talking about reducing racism doesn't mean anything without concrete actions. Use the security that you feel comes with your seniority and whiteness to make people uncomfortable with the way things are and suggest some fixes. Push your district to be the kind of place where you're proud to work and where Black people can get and keep the jobs they deserve. I gave credit to our author for at least, dwelling on the one question that I had when this started. And that was, you need to get the facts. Why were these women, quote unquote, displaced, which is a very interesting word to use by the original author. And without knowing that, what does our respondent mean by the jobs they deserve? Maybe they were displaced because they weren't doing their jobs. You don't know, but you're making an assumption, just as our original author made an assumption. Or if they're not making an assumption, they're withholding information. But there's the advice. Everything sounds very boilerplate as far as interviews are concerned. Ask the same questions in the same order. Yeah, I have a structured interview process. Sure. Use structured metrics when evaluating your candidates. Yeah, that's all very boilerplate. Make interviews as blind as possible. Now, I don't know what that means. And our author did not give any suggestions as to how to enact such a thing, which is bizarre given how everything else has some detail to it. But okay, and then specifically we have our expert talking about names, which I've heard over and over and over again. And I don't know, maybe there's some truth to that. I can't say. But how do you make an interview blind? Like I say, sorting through the application process, if you're taking on like online applications, right? And step one is the applicant fills out a resume or something online, and then they transmit that to some holding area. And in the process of being transmitted, the name, the age, the race and gender, if those are even on the application, are obscured. And then the person sorting through the applications just look at the relevant experience, work history, and so on. And then they sort those into interview or decline. And then after that, they start the interview process. Maybe a phone interview, sure. At that point, you're going to at least have to know the person's name to ask for them on the phone, right? Okay. And race and gender and age are still obscured. As soon as you talk to the person on the phone, more likely than not, A, you're going to know their name, and B, you're going to have possibly some idea of their gender. It's not given. People's voices are different. And then when you get to the final in-person interview process, well, then all bets are off the table. So, yeah, I could see making interviews, quote unquote, as blind as possible. That's the only thing I could think of to do so. But what do I know? And other than that, organize others who feel secure in their roles to help advocate these changes and also hold the district accountable. What does that mean? We had that definition of terms sheet we had on Lords of the Night last week, where accountable was brought up, being held accountable, which basically means publicly shaming, pressure, sort of internal strife kind of stuff. But on a procedural level, on an organizational level, what does it mean to hold the district accountable if after some time you're not seeing results? And the only way to know if you've achieved the result you want is on the basis of the skin color of the people you are hiring. Are the correct skin colors being hired? Because that is the basis of this entire thing. And yet, apparently, we're trying to reduce discrimination. Thank you, Matt Barnes. All right, I'll say it. By that logic, even though I'm white, I deserve to be an architect and not just a carpenter. I don't know. I mean, Jesus was white, wasn't he? Maybe. I don't know. All the pictures say he was. He was just a carpenter. Isn't that enough? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know I don't know what this means. This is all of this is perpetuating the very thing that they say they want to fight against. This whole thing right here. I am a white woman. Okay, so you've already imposed upon yourself power and authority and specialness on the basis of your skin color. And you've looked at your colleagues and how they were displaced, and you're pitying them. Oh, they've been unfairly treated because they were black. Which is to be expected, obviously, because if I was elevated because I'm white, obviously, they're going to be victimized because they're black. So I have to help them. What can I do to help these people that obviously need help? And of course, our author, like I say, it's surprising to me that our author would be so sensible in this first paragraph, but then everything else proceeds from an assumption of the worst possible scenario. And then the advice to address the worst possible scenario is the very same thing that you're purportedly trying to fight back against. So, is there anything new here? Not really. I've heard this all before. Is it a new set of individuals giving advice on the subject? Well, at least to me. Although I think I have read something by Janae Desmond Harris before. Pretty sure I have. Because if we're talking about Dear Prudence and Slate, I'm pretty sure we have before. But there is the advice for someone in a school district on how to achieve the proper results because of an assumption of inherent and structural racism by someone who elevates and or denigrates people on the basis of their skin color. Specifically, denigrating herself on the basis of being white and elevating others on the basis of being black, as they were unfairly treated and I am being unjustly elevated. Woe is me, I'm a terrible person. But except instead of quitting an institution and a situation that you arrived at unfairly, right? Our author here, our initial speaker, she didn't come to her job fairly. She got it because she was white. In her world, in her calculus, she's only there because she's white. So she's there illegitimately. She doesn't actually possess the skills or experience necessary to fulfill the job. And yet the advice is you should stay. You should stay in that job because you're already a true believer. And as a true believer who obviously possesses power because you're white, and we're not promoting the concept of white power here. No, not at all. But since you're there and since you believe it, regardless of whether you should be there or not, leverage what you have there to achieve the ends that we want, to fight discrimination and racism. Don't quit. Don't do the honorable thing and remove yourself from an institution and a position that are unworthy. Now, stay there and be an agent for change. Yes, an agent for change, like turning back the clock. Anyway, there is the first and possibly only episode of Articles of Faith. Perhaps I'll do more of these in the future. I don't know. You guys let me know. Is this something you'd like to see me do more of? Specifically, reading articles about, the social justice type things, as I've addressed in the past. I mean, I'd have to be sort of quasi-specific about what kind of things I looked at. But does that sound interesting? Let me know in the comments below. I'm still sussing out what I'd like to do for specific projects after Lords of the Night concludes. And speaking of Lords of the Night, which will be concluding after 4.5 some odd years on August 24th, 2021. That's a Tuesday on Satsu's channel. But speaking of Lords of the Night, you can find me and Satsu 2 Cents once more on Lords of the Night, Monday night, again at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, where he and I will talk about the news of the day, news stories you submit, what we've been up to on the internet, and then your questions and comments. But also, more immediately, tonight, Saturday, the 7th of August, 2021, I'm completely dating myself here, I will be doing a special broadcast at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, the most desirable time slot, where Sister Scribe and myself will be watching Night of the Living Dead and cheesing at it as we go. So if you'd like to join Sister Scribe and I for that, please be sure to come back to this channel tonight at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for movie night. Public domain, movie night, Night of the Living Dead. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me for this spur-of-the-moment broadcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it educational and informative. I call it edu-fantastic and intelli-terrific. Hope you all have a good rest of your weekend. I hope you are all safe and well. Thank you to moderators, if there were any here. I don't think there were any. I didn't see any in the chat. But if you were here, thanks for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everyone who donated, thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. Everyone, I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon. And I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.